Today on the Transplant Helper, we're going to be discussing organ time frames, specifically the amount of time that could potentially pass between, on the one hand, receiving the call that a potential organ was available, and on the other hand, actually being in surgery, receiving the wonderful gift of life. Now, with that being said, more than likely, if you're currently listed for transplant during the evaluation process, most likely your team sat down with you kind of during the educational period of that, and maybe they discussed with you already the viability of organs outside of the donor body, basically how long you had to get to the hospital to be in surgery in order to have those organs to be most viable for you and to give you the best chance or opportunity of living. In addition to that, most likely, as a disclaimer, each and every team is going to be slightly different on this. They may offer you a different span of time, as well as they may offer you a few different variables or options to make sure that a gift could be given if it were to come available. For example, my transplant team, UAB Hospital, when I was listed for transplant officially, as I think in the beginning a status 2 and eventually a status 1, they told me back then that I would have about a 4-hour window to get to the hospital in order to receive a heart transplant. Therefore, I was not allowed to travel outside of about a 4-hour radius from the hospital. Now, thankfully, I live about an hour and 15 minutes from UAB Hospital, so in general, that was not going to be an issue at all. I could be there, no doubt about it. However, there were periods of time after I'd been listed for so long that I kind of just wanted to throw up my hands and go on a vacation with my family and just enjoy the time that I potentially had left. And so I sat down with them and actually discussed the options I would have available. And they were very kind in that. The first and main option that every center is probably going to offer you is that if you want to go away with your family, have a vacation, a little getaway or something of that sort, you can do that, but potentially you could be listed as a status 7, which basically means you're on the list, but you're not available for transplant. Now, status 7 could occur for various reasons, including you being too sick for transplant or too well, but also could occur just simply because you're kind of out of pocket and not available again for transplant in the period of time that is allowed. But thankfully, my team went beyond that, in that when I called them and said, hey, we'd like to get away and go to the beach, they didn't consider the status 7 for me. They actually said, Jim, what we can do is leave you on the list as the status you currently are. I think that was a status 2 at the time. We can leave you right there. We can leave things as they are. However, if we receive a call, we're going to contact you and see exactly where you are and how long it might take for you to get back. And if that is outside of that 4-hour window, they even offered, thankfully they did, and I didn't have to use it, but they actually offered to send a jet to get me or to pick me up in a helicopter to make sure I could get to the transplant center in time. And more than likely, your team is going to be willing to work with you on that, especially if you're willing to notify them in advance and keep up with them, kind of keep in contact and let them know how things are going and your availability or the lack thereof. So that basically are some of the options you may have as far as that. And that's why individual rules may vary, because they may be willing to work with you versus maybe not so much on the other hand. But as far as typical standards go, basically, if you're up for a heart transplant, typically it's advised that you got somewhere between the neighborhood of 4 and 6 hours that those organs can remain viable outside of the body before you have to actually be in surgery, or else you're kind of up against the wall and risking those organs becoming unviable. As far as the lung transplant, it's about the same window, 4 to 6 hours. As far as the liver, it's extended a bit. You've got about 8 to 12 hours generally recommended. As far as the kidney, you actually have 24 to 36 hours, so much longer of the viability for the kidney. Of course, in the kidney's place, it could be from a living donor, and you could have an unlimited amount of time because it could actually be scheduled. But as far as deceased donors, these are kind of the standards: heart, lung, liver, kidney, such as that. Now, as far as other organs or other parts of the body, things like corneas, you generally got about 48 hours to get to the hospital and have that surgery. Intestines, I think, is 8 to 16. Things like pancreas, maybe 12 to 18. And so again, each one of those things is going to be slightly different. As far as tissues and bone goes, there's basically no time frame on that because those things can be stored for the longevity of time. And so that's kind of the standard of things. However, I hear from people all the time. They'll say, wait a minute, my team told me I only had 4 to 5 hours to get there, for example, for the heart transplant. But I received the call and wasn't transplanted for 12, 15, 20 hours, and I really don't understand that. Well, here's exactly what's happening kind of in the background. And if we think this through, we kind of already understand this. But you got to keep in mind, specifically when you're dealing with a deceasing donor or someone who's in the process of passing, on the other side of that, you likely got a family who's grieving, who's trying to make some of the most difficult decisions of their entire life. Maybe they're awaiting some other loved ones to come in to say their goodbyes before they actually let go and let that person completely pass so those organs can be recovered. And so there's always a lot of variability between that. For example, from the time that I actually received the call and was notified an organ was available, I wasn't transplanted actually for about 12 to 14 hours after that period. As a matter of fact, I was not even in surgery or taken back to pre-op for I think about 9 hours from that one period of time being called or being notified versus actually being taken down to pre-op and ultimately surgery. So that was a much longer span of time than that standardized 4 to 5 hours for that heart transplant. But again, on the other side of that, there was a grieving family, my donor's family, who I keep in contact with now. I've actually heard their story from their perspective, and I kind of understand or grasp a little bit more about what was going on. As a matter of fact, in reality, they consider the date of my donor's death to be May the 21st, 2013, even though I wasn't actually transplanted until May the 23rd. So that's 48 hours or more that span between the donor's decease and my receiving of that organ. Now, specifically, again, he was remaining on life support. They were making decisions about the actual donation itself. Family members were being notified and brought in. Just again, that same process is going on. So that kind of explains there why a lot of times you will have someone that will report and say, well, I received the call here, and then it was all these number of hours or even days that passed before I actually got the donation, and they kind of wonder what happened. That's basically about it. So again, just a reminder of what we said so far, there will be some individual rules that they're going to lay down in the beginning. There are some typical standards, such as I listed for each organ, and then there's always going to be that variability between that span of time that you may have. So I said all that to just confirm to you and remind you that you don't really need to panic about this. Obviously, you need to follow your team's rules as far as how far you can travel, how far you can be away, or how long you've got to get to the hospital. But in essence, basically, as long as you're following their guidelines and their recommendations, then you're going to be just fine. You're probably going to have a lot longer than you expect to get to the hospital. However, there are some of those rare instances where the donor is in the same facility and therefore something comes up a lot sooner, a lot more quickly. Obviously, that's going to be kind of a jumping gun on that. But in general, most of the time, that's not the case. So you've got a little bit of time to consider, to think this thing through, and to get things done. So just kind of take a deep breath and relax and be thankful for the gift of life that may be available. Okay, so thank you so much. I just want to ask you, if you will, if you've already been transplanted, please comment below. Tell us a little bit about the period of time that did take place or span between getting the call and getting the actual surgery itself. What type of time frame was that? And maybe if you've got some insight as to why that time frame was what it was, then add that in the comments below as well. I think that could help us all to understand a bit better. Again, until next time, stay stronger, friends.